course, here to historic 18th and Vine, and even more specifically, the great Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, a place that I've had some involvement for the last 31 years. Wow. I started here as a volunteer in 1993.
Awesome.
Yeah, who knew? Who knew? I certainly did not. You know, that I would grow from being a volunteer to now trying to lead what I believe to be one of the great civil rights institutions in this country, that being the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It is such a special place. And to have Cub fans here, particularly given the connection that the founder of this museum, the late great John Jordan Buck O'Neill, had with the great city of Chicago. And so that makes it even more special because Buck loves Chicago. Yeah, he loves Chicago, and he loved his time with the Cubs. And of course, I don't have to tell you, but he brought you Ernie Banks.
You know who he is.
He brought you Lou Brock, even though you traded him away. You traded him away. He brought you Lee Arthur Smith.
Lee Smith,
He brought you Joe Carter. Yeah, Joe still lives here in Kansas City. Oscar Gamble, Sweet Lou Johnson, George Altman, all of these legendary African-American stars. And while he didn't sign Billy Williams, of course you may know the story that he was responsible for Billy Williams staying with the Cubs. Billy had left the Cubs and gone home to Whistler, Alabama, Mobile, Alabama. And who did the Cubs send to go get him? Buck O'Neill. And Buck said he went down to Whistler, and for several days he would just pick Billy up. He never said a word about going back. Said he would pick him up and take him around to local ball fields. And as you can well imagine, all the kids were excited that one of their own was a professional ball player. And Buck says after 3-4 days of this, Brian, Mr. Williams looked at me and said, Buck, I'm ready to go back. And the Cubs wanted him to put him on the bus. And Buck had an old Plymouth Fury. And he says, I'm going to put him in my car. And he drove him from Whistler, Alabama, back to San Antonio, Texas. Billy Williams would become sweet swinging Billy Williams. Absolutely. And future Hall of Famer. And Mr. Williams will tell you that he owes his career to one Buck O'Neill. And so that connection to the city of Chicago is tremendous. Of course, it was a Chicagoan by the name of Andrew Root Foster who organized the Negro Leagues here in Kansas City in 1920. As a matter of fact, just around the corner from where we are now, the old Paseo YMCA, the building still, you probably did.
Yeah, we did.
The building still stands. That is where they met to sign the documents to start the Negro National League, the first successful organized black baseball league. The Negro Leagues would then go on to operate amazingly for 40 years, from 1920 until 1960. And as you can well imagine, that surprises most of the people who come to see us because most of them can relate the fact that Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier in 1947. And I do believe that the assumption is if Jackie breaks the color barrier in 1947, if there was a Negro Leagues, surely it must have ended in and around that time. Well, the league operated for another 13 years. Why? Because it took Major League Baseball 12 years before every Major League team had at least one black baseball player. The Boston Red Sox were the last team to integrate in 1959 when they signed a guy by the name of Elijah Pumpsie Green. That would then complete the integration cycle. By 1960, the Negro Leagues would dismantle. They ceased operations because by then the best young black players had now started to move into the major leagues or into their minor league system, and there was just simply no replenishing system. And so this museum chronicles one of the greatest stories in the annals of American history. And nobody knew anything about it. It was like it never happened. So it's not in the pages of American history books. And so countless generations of us have gone through our formal educations without knowing one of the most significant chapters, not in just baseball history, but in American history. And that's the rich, compelling, inspirational story of the Negro Leagues. And it's a story that the spirit of the story is, you won't let me play with you in the major leagues, then I'll create a league of my own.
I'll show you.
I'll show you.
I'll show you.
That's exactly it.
Yes,
And so as I remind my guests, while America tried to prevent them from sharing in the joys of its so-called national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. So as you make your way through the museum today, this is not a sad, somber kind of story. And I can understand why people might think that it would be, because obviously it is anchored against the backdrop of American segregation, a horrible chapter in this country's history. But what you'll discover here is that this is a celebration. It is the celebration of the power of the human spirit to do just that, persevere and prevail. Yeah, and that's what makes this story so compelling, so awe-inspiring. And I tell people all the time that what I love about our museum is that you don't have to be a baseball fan to appreciate the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Now, of course, we think it's sacrilegious if you're not a baseball fan, but you don't have to be. If you are a fan of American history, you're going to love this museum. If you are a fan of the underdog overcoming adversity to go on to greatness, you're going to love this museum. And if you are a baseball fan to boot, as I know you all are, then as we say in Georgia, you're in hog heaven. Because you're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever put on a baseball uniform. And that's usually how you hear me describe them, as great athletes. Because most of these guys could have played anything. But of course, to make a living then, basketball and football were more or less collegiate sports. Nobody was paying either of them any attention. So if you're going to make a living playing a team sport, you played baseball. So the major leagues got the best white baseball players, the Negro Leagues got the best black and Hispanic baseball players playing in its league. And I do think that's the most difficult thing for my guests to understand, is that there were two professional baseball leagues operating simultaneously to one another. But they were both very professional. And the Negro Leagues would give you some of the greatest talent to ever play this game. Brian and I was just talking about, I just got back from Rickwood Field just a few weeks ago, where we were at that epic celebration, baseball salute to the Negro Leagues at Rickwood Field, and of course the passing of Mr. Mays just days before we had that celebration. If I would have told you then that a 17-year-old kid who would be patrolling center field for the Birmingham Black Barons would grow to be recognized as the greatest major leaguer to ever play this game, you would say, Bob, you must have smoked it. But that's exactly what happened. He was 17 years old when he joined the Birmingham Black Barons. Henry Aaron was 18 years old when he joined the Indianapolis Clowns in the Negro Leagues, where he was a skinny, cross-handed hitting shortstop. So in the case of Mr. Aaron, he was a right-hand hitter who was hitting with his left hand on top. That is unorthodox. The fear is that you would break your wrist hitting in that manner. Henry Aaron was knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. When he gets to the Clowns, they reluctantly put the right hand on top because they didn't want to tinker with this kid's swing. They put the right hand on top, and the rest, as they say, is history. When you get to the section where the Clowns are kind of highlighted, you'll see this wonderful photograph of him standing at the train station there in Mobile. And it's my favorite photograph in the entire exhibition because Henry Aaron is my all-time favorite baseball player and my childhood idol as a kid growing up in Crawfordville, Georgia, a town of 500 east of Atlanta, west of Augusta. And every day on the playground, I wanted to be Henry Aaron. Now, I know some other kids wanted to be Henry Aaron sometime, but I had to be Henry Aaron. And in 1999, I get to take my childhood idol on a tour of this museum. And let me tell y'all, that was the first time that I'd ever been starstruck. And every time I was around Mr. Aaron, I was reduced to that nearly 12-year-old man when he hit home run 715. Hard to believe, 50 years ago. Home run 715 in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium. I'm at home in my mother's living room, and Brian, as he was circling the bases there in Atlanta, Fulton County, I'm circling the bases in my mother's living room right there with me. So she had an old couch that was first base, the old TV was second base, the other old couch was third base, and her recliner was home plate. And as my childhood idol was touching them all, I'm touching them all too. And there we were face to face. And in the photograph, you'll notice that there's a small duffel bag right by his foot. And he looks at me and says, "Bob, I may have had 2 changes of clothes in that bag, $1.50 in my pocket, and a ham sandwich that my mama had made me, going to go chase that dream." It worked out pretty well for the ham. But think about this, y'all. If Jackie Robinson doesn't break the color barrier in 1947, there's a great possibility that we would have missed Willie Mays. We would have missed Henry Aaron. We would have missed Ernie Banks. Can you imagine our sport without those great stars? No. And if you can imagine what it was like before 1947. Because they didn't learn how to play baseball after 1947. They were playing great baseball well before 1947. And I had always said that had the doors opened sooner, the record books would be entirely different. And so what happened May 29th? They opened the door, and now the record books are entirely different. And it doesn't diminish those great major leaguers who were for so long at the top of those lists. It just means that you should know who Josh Gibson was. And let me tell you, the power was real. The greatest combination of power and average that this sport has ever seen. Buck O'Neill would describe him in this fashion, that he had the eyes of Ted Williams and the power of Babe Ruth rolled into one dynamic package. And he was doing it, folks, as a catcher. So when you get on the field of legends where the life-size statues are, you will see that we purposely put Gibson in a defensive posture because he wasn't a good catcher. He was a great catcher. Rifle arm. He's throwing guys out from the crouch back in that era. Had complete control of his pitching staff, so he called a great game and was a good running catcher. He gonna steal you 20, 25 bases or more to go with that big bat of his. And when I say big bat, I mean big bat. 40 ounce, 41 inches. Wow. And when you look at the pictures of Josh, he's not choking up. He's got it gripped down below the knob. Big, massive hands, big, powerful forearms, big, powerful thighs, and great eyes. He just put the ball in play because he didn't strike out a lot. Gibson might strike out 20, 25 times in a season. He put it in play, and he put it in play with a lot of power. Yeah, his outs, as I say, were loud outs because the third baseman and the shortstop were damn near left field when Gibson came up in play. I guess you could say that was the Negro Leagues version of a shit because you were not going to creep in on Josh because you could get killed. And so the statues are all life-size. They represent the first group of Negro Leaguers to be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. So that's how our All-Star team was chosen. Old Buck is on the outside looking in, managing that great All-Star team. And I don't even have to tell you who's on the mound. The legendary Leroy Satchel Paige. Arguably the greatest pitcher this sport has ever seen. We know for certain the oldest rookie in the history of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball says that the old man was 42 years old when he finally got his opportunity to pitch with the Cleveland Indians in 1948. Satchel was likely closer to 52 than 42.
Birth certificate was not right.
He never told his real age. And it still remains an age-old mystery of just how old Satchel really was. And some of you may remember that in 1948, Cleveland would win the World Series, led by Satchel Paige and the great Larry Doby, who would integrate the American League just weeks after Jackie breaks the color barrier in the National League. Many thought Satchel should have been named Rookie of the Year. He gets called up July 7th of 1948 on what we believe was his 42nd birthday. He goes 6-1 with a 2.4 ERA his rookie season, again at age 42, which means he was likely closer to 52. Satchel never told his real age, and y'all, I honestly do not believe that Satchel knew his real age. and that is not far-fetched, because there were a lot of folks, particularly black folks born in the Deep South, who did not know how old they were. You see, baseball says he was born July 7, 1906, which I absolutely do not believe. The man that died here in Kansas City in 1982, y'all, he's seen 76 a long time ago. Satchel was likely born into the early to mid-1890s in Mobile, Alabama. And like virtually everyone of that era, you're not born in a hospital, you're born at home to a midwife. And so that birth record was kept where? Anybody got an idea?
I remember.
Absolutely. Back page of the family Bible. And according to Satchel, the goat ate that page and so he didn't know. And as Satchel would whimsically say, pose the question, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you are? Or that age is simply mind over matter. If you don't mind, it don't matter. And that is how he led his life. Now, in his prime, they clocked his fastball at 105 miles per hour. But what really made Satchel so special, and I can tell you right now, 105 is pretty doggone special. But what really made Satchel so special was 105 with pinpoint control. He could put it exactly where he wanted to put it. And folks, I'm not talking about just throwing strikes. The catcher set the target, he hit the target. He didn't miss. You see, he didn't warm up in the bullpen like most pitchers do, throwing to the catcher across home plate. Now, Satchel Paige would use a stick of foil chewing gum wrapper, and the catcher would sit the chewing gum wrapper on top of home plate. And wherever the catcher moved the chewing gum wrapper, Satchel right over the top of that chewing gum wrapper. He was uncanny. I tell my guests this all the time, and I mean it sincerely. There will never, ever, ever be another Leroy Satchel Paige. Not someone who combines the longevity. By his estimation, he pitched in over 2,600 games. The great stuff. Recorded some 55 no-hitters and only God knows how many strikeouts. And the charisma. He could sell it. Yeah, he could sell it, but he could back it up. And some of you may know that Satchel had names for his pitches. So he didn't have fastball, curveball, changeup, slider, not Satchel. Satchel had what he called his midnight creeper. He had the two-humper. He had the bat dodger. He had the hesitation pitch. He had the long tom, the short tom, the jump ball, the trouble ball, the radio ball, the wobbly ball, the dipsy-do. And he also had a pitch that he famously called his B-ball. You know why he called it the B-ball? Because Satchel says, it bees where I want it to be, where I want it to be there. And I tell all my young Major League pitchers, when they come into this museum, they better go out on that field and rub elbows with Satchel and work on that B-ball. This is a special place. This is a special time to be able to welcome you all here to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I hope you enjoy your tour. I look forward to seeing you out at the Cape.
Yeah.
3 things really quick. Number 1, I know not everybody has Marquee Network, but if you are in the Chicagoland area, you do have Marquee Network. Bob was in a documentary about Buck O'Neil called It's All Jazz.
Oh.
If you have not seen that, I cannot implore you enough as a Cub fan to really take a look at that, because it really gives you an idea of the importance of Buck O'Neil to the Cubs organization as a manager, as a scout, all of these great things. Number 2, Bob is going to talk to this weekend to both the Cubs clubhouse today.
The clubhouse tomorrow. I'm headed out to talk to the Royals clubhouse today.
So just to let them know the importance of the Negro League Museum. And then anyone that's staying on Sunday, MLB does a salute to the Negro Leagues. This is the centennial of the Negro League World Series.
First World Series.
And so they are going to have special uniforms on Sunday. So the Kansas City uniforms are going to have the Negro League centennial patch, and the Cubs uniforms are going to have a special patch with Buck O'Neil. Now, I know a lot of you guys care a lot about the charitable endeavors of Club 400. If you go to cubs.com/auctions, they will be auctioning off those game-used items worn on Sunday that's going to have the Buck, for us Cub fans, they're going to have the Buck O'Neil patches on them. And all that money that gets raised on those raffles will be going here to the Negro League Museum.
All right.
So,
Please give generously. Guys, thank y'all again for coming. You can get your tickets inside in the gift shop and make yourselves at home.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.